Hey, Cypher here, and the channel hit 100,000 subscribers. And let me just say, thank you so much. It's been 6 long years, and every step of this journey has been amazing. So to celebrate, I thought I'd do something a little out of the norm, and kind of challenging. I made an autobiography, as in, my history thus far, as kind of a way of saying who I am, and why I do what I do and everything on this channel, as kind of a thank you for 100,000 subscribers. Now you guys have gotten bits and pieces of this. In fact, I actually revealed my name a long time ago on the hall-patton episode. But I have kept my real name somewhat secret, mostly because of my dad, because I didn't want to ride on his coattails. And I think by now, I can definitely say I'm no longer riding his coattails. So the name Cypher, as I'm sure most of you have figured out by now, is a pseudonym. It's not my real name. My real name is Joe Hall-Patton. And here is my story thus far. Actually, this was recorded in early June, and at least for me, it was quite a learning experience because, having to make your own story when you do so many biographies for other people kind of makes you rethink what you're doing. So this was also a learning experience for me. And hopefully, by the end of this, you guys have a pretty good idea of where I'm coming from on this channel. My parents are scholars in their own right, at least one of whom you guys might recognize. They are Mark and Colleen Hall-Patton. Mom is a sociologist, and Dad is currently a director for 3 history museums. So you can probably see some influence already, though I will never admit to it. But, for instance, Dad's appeared in a couple episodes, and both of them have worked with me to proofread and research quite a few more. Eventually, they got jobs in San Luis Obispo, California, which is where I was born in 1988. We ended up moving to Las Vegas, Nevada when I was in elementary school, but we never stopped going back to SLO. Plus, I've got deep familial ties to SoCal. In fact, my parents used most of their spare cash for us to travel, rather than fancy video game consoles and whatnot. So I've been over pretty much all the United States, except the Deep South, Alaska, and Hawaii. But most of those vacations were spent in museums, antique stores, and bookstores. So I pretty much grew up in Vegas. Well, Henderson technically, but no one really cares about those borders. I got to experience the crazy growth and diversity of that city in her prime. I was just a normal, scrawny kid, I guess. Did regular extracurriculars, such as piano lessons. By the way, that's me playing right now. Say hi, me in the future.
Hi.
Been playing since I was 11. In high school, I was on the swim and wrestling team until my senior year. I began taking AutoCAD classes and decided I wanted to be an architect, but my grades were absolutely abysmal. My parents couldn't afford to send me to college, and there was no way I was getting a scholarship, so I needed a way to pay for it. At a college fair, there was a booth that advertised free tuition for all. It was the National Guard. The Army was basically the only way to pay for college, so I joined at the age of 17, hence why I didn't do any sports senior year. After graduating high school, on the fortuitous day of June 6th, 2006, or 666, I got a whopping 2 weeks of freedom before losing it to basic training. Didn't finish until I went through tanker school 4 months later. Even turned 18 while at the School of Hard Knocks, as we called it. But I got home, bought my Jeep, which I still have, and started a job as a draftsman at a small architecture firm. I got to do some pretty cool stuff. Vegas still has a lot of structures I designed, but we didn't do that many big projects. It was a small firm. In the spring of '07, I started at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas as an architecture student. I was still a horrible student, plus the Army kept pulling me away for stuff. For instance, I focused on running for a while, and eventually ran 2 marathons carrying my unit's guidon for parts of the run. In the summer of 2008, they sent me to Boise, Idaho to reclass to being a cavalry scout, which has always felt kinda sad. I miss the old tank. While I was up there training, the Great Recession hit, and it hit Las Vegas particularly bad, which made me lose my drafting job. Luckily, the Army was paying enough for me to go to school full time. Well, for 1 more semester, that is. in late 2008, my unit had been setting up a voluntary mission to Iraq. I was one of the few soldiers who didn't want to go, but then they flipped it on us and made it a mandatory mission to Afghanistan instead. We spent the better part of the first half of 2009 training up for that. First we went to Camp Roberts, which sucked, but at least I was back in San Luis Obispo. Then we went to Camp Atterbury, which has no redeeming qualities besides not being Fort Irwin. Screw that place especially. And then we deployed fully. It was the largest deployment in Nevada history, with more than 600 guardsmen going. I remember marching up and down the Mandalay Bay Arena as a guidon bearer for what felt like ages. It was a big deal, but pomp and ceremony is always annoying. We were tasked with protecting the provincial reconstruction teams. Basically, each Afghani province had a team of engineers assigned to paying for construction projects. That team goes out and negotiates with locals and makes sure they're doing a good job. Real hearts and minds crap. Obviously, they need security forces for all this field work, so that was our job. We were under the Navy, believe it or not. The Seabees were our engineers, so we had naval command structure in a landlocked country. Hell, I even have a Naval Achievement Medal. Yep, soldiers with Navy medals. Anyways, our province was Kunar, not a particularly nice place, at least in those days. If folks in our unit weren't seeing combat elsewhere, they'd send them down to our province for a little fun in the sun. We had the Korangal on one side, and the Pakistani border on the other. Yeah, well, I got my combat action badge within a week of ingress. If you've heard of the Battle of Ganjagal, we had to watch that whole thing go down just a couple miles away. Heart-rending stuff. We ended up all over Kunar, and that province was infamous. But most of the time, nothing happened. Combat was the exception to the tedium, even when doing stuff in the field. Besides going outside the wire for missions, we also had to pull guard duty, both on the Forward Operational Base, or FOB, and on our observation post up the mountain, OP for short. That OP was the only enjoyable time I had, since there were basically no rules up there. We didn't actually have control of the FOB, because it was actually operated by what was called the OGA, or Other Governmental Agencies. But you can guess which agency that's referring to. So we were in the middle of Kunar, right down the road from the capital of the province called Asadabad. Spent a lot of time at the governor's palace and patrolling the streets. Mostly though, we were mounted. The war took a lot of time out of my life, even turned 21 out there, and was forced to try to trick my liver with fake beer. Ugh. I did get a 2-week leave, and really lived it up being of age in Vegas for the first time. Unfortunately, I had to return before Christmas, and ended up spending it in Kuwait. How's that for irony? After a year of that BS, we came home in mid-2010. Had a big parade walking right off the tarmac, marching us across Las Vegas Boulevard and to the Mandalay Bay parking lot. As soon as we got released, I ran out to my mom and my sister, but my dad was nowhere to be seen. So I asked, "Where's Dad?" Mom just said, "He's signing autographs." I thought this was absurd. Who wants some local historian's autograph? Turns out, a lot of folks. He had told me over the phone that there was some show on the History Channel that kept calling him for authentications at a pawn shop.
Let me just call somebody up who will know. Okay? Let me get him down here. He will look at this, and he can probably answer every question we got, and then he'll just go on for like another half hour about this stuff.
I thought it sounded dumb. Plus, he'd been on TV my whole life, and no one cared. Well, that show was Pawn Stars, one of the best performing shows the History Channel ever released. That's the main reason I chose to keep a pseudonym on this channel. I don't want to be associated with Pawn Stars. Not because I dislike the show, though to be clear, I do, but because I wanted to be my own person without people constantly bringing up my father. Trust me, it's a problem.
I told you to just keep on talking.
Can't take Dad anywhere because of the hordes of starstruck folks gawking at us. Well, this hardened my resolve to become an architect. But I idiotically skipped classes and homework, so therefore got really bad grades. I took one more semester as an architecture major and had to switch. In that time, since I was back from Afghanistan and flush with money, I bought a Harley. I already had an old 1981 Yamaha, which I got in '08, but Harleys are vastly superior. Fight me! In a foreboding incident, though, the week before finals, someone T-boned me in the UNLV parking lot, broke my foot and totaled my first Harley. I'd get a better one the following spring with the insurance money, but with a dead bike and a broken foot, I failed to pass into architecture's upper division. To be fair, they eliminate 200 students down to 30, but either way, I had to turn to the subject I originally feared. I didn't want to do history because of my dad, but my friends kept complaining about me lecturing them on the subject. I thought, well, hey, I can make a career out of annoying people with history, so I did. There's a lesson for you guys. Don't complain too much, or else someone will make a career out of your misery. Well, my grades turned around and I did pretty well, making the dean's list and graduating in winter of 2012, along with a minor in philosophy. Cool, so I was ready for graduate school, but didn't get in at first. What do you do with a BA in history? You get another degree. So I had to work as a tech support manager for a few months before beginning as a substitute teacher in August of 2013. Had a lot of free time before that. As you might have guessed, with the architecture and piano things, I've always had a bit of a creative streak, I guess you could say. I even picked up the guitar after Afghanistan, along with playing a couple other instruments before then. Say hi, me in the future.
Do I have to?
Yes.
But I'm no good at this.
You've been playing for the better part of a decade, get over yourself.
Fine.
So I kept trying a bunch of side projects like those, even trying to start a band for a little bit, but I eventually landed on something that stuck. I was complaining that there were all these science shows on YouTube, but no history ones. I mean, there were, but I wasn't aware of them. And certainly nothing like I wanted. Yet again, my friends complaining drove me to make a life-changing decision, and I started my own show. I wasn't a historian yet, so I called it Cynical Cypher 88. I'd tried making a hookah explainer channel months prior, but that got boring quickly. Now if you go back to those old episodes, you'll see me with long hair. That's because at the end of 2011, I got out of the Army National Guard. I was never a good soldier, and I hated being in. Yet there was more to do with the Army after getting out. You actually sign up for 8 years, but the last 2 for me were what's called Inactive Ready Reserve. So I didn't cut my hair until I was done with that. They didn't call me to muster after the first few months, possibly because of the hair. Anyways, this YouTube channel was one I stuck with, despite not really getting anywhere very quickly. So I had to work as a substitute before going to grad school, but I did get in.
And there was much rejoicing.
After a bunch of applications, I was accepted to Cal Poly, which meant going back to San Luis Obispo. I love SLO. It's one of the most beautiful places to live in this country. Well, the whole Central Coast is really, which is different from SoCal or NorCal. Got its own type of cooking and everything. It's just too damned expensive to live there.
Rent, it's too damn high.
I blew through my savings right quick, even having to get student loans. But at least I got to return to SLO. While at Cal Poly, I shifted my historical focus. Before going there, I was interested in American small wars. After all, I'd fought in one, but I realized that wouldn't get me anywhere in the history profession. I needed something broader. I'm always interested in the history of where I live, and our family was well remembered in SLO. I even worked a couple internships at some local museums there, so that's what I shifted to, the history of violence locally. In effect, I switched from military history to Western history. It was still narrowly focused, but I could actually expand from there with interesting studies. So that's what I wrote my master's thesis on. It's called Pacifying Paradise, Violence and Vigilantism in San Luis Obispo County. I'll leave a link in the description if anyone wants to read it. It wasn't my first publication, but it is still my longest work as of writing this. You can find my other stuff on your own, if you so choose. So I graduated, with honors, from Cal Poly in 2016. Before graduating, since I was published in a couple of places, I changed the channel's name to The Cynical Historian. It was still tiny, but it seemed like a better title. That didn't help though, and I didn't get into a PhD program immediately, yet again, getting screwed by my lousy performance before becoming a history major. Had to take a few jobs to get by, almost ending up moving back to Vegas because of the cost of living in SLO. But I eventually landed a drafting job, which I really enjoyed. After putting in my application again in the winter, I was just hoping I wouldn't have to find history work as just an MA. Historians with MAs have very limited possibilities, basically public history only. But something happened on this very channel that changed that. A video I quickly slapped together called 10 Common Slavery Myths blew up in popularity. It was a crazy time, and the comments were nasty, people were nasty, I was getting death threats all over the place. The racism on that video was abhorrent, but the video itself was incredibly popular. Only a week later, I got confirmations from 2 of the universities I applied to. Can't help but notice the timing on that. I accepted the one that offered the best funding, which means working as a graduate assistant. You know, like grading papers, always sitting in on classes, proctoring, all that kind of stuff, even sometimes going so far as to teach. And the best offer was the University of New Mexico. Had to quit my job in SLO and move out to Albuquerque, where I remain today. Kinda hate this town, to be honest. Kept having stuff get stolen, both by my roommates and strangers. I've lost more in this town than I have my entire life combined. And I only got here in the summer of 2017. Even my Jeep was stolen, though she was recovered. I'm glad I left my Harley in Vegas, because I've had 2 bicycles stolen here out of locked garages. The one redeeming quality of Albuquerque as a town is that there are a lot of breweries around here. Plus, the state has a very violent history, which is perfect for my studies. Of course, something happened in 2017 that has substantially reoriented my historical point of view, yet again. The Las Vegas shooting happened that October. Since my dad's museum is in charge of collecting the makeshift memorials,
they need to be saved so that in the future, when we look back, we can understand ourselves and people in the future can understand how we dealt with this tragedy.
I've been deeply involved in the scholarship on that subject. The first paper I wrote on it was actually converted into a video on this very channel. We were actually some of the first academics to put out anything on the subject. I wasn't the first, since my mom presented before me, but yeah, I'm still processing how this affects what I study. Besides, I'm in New Mexico now. I'll start the dissertation writing process in about half a year, which will take about another year or 2. I'll be looking at violence in the Southwest, with an emphasis on New Mexico. Though I might loop in Arizona and Southern Nevada, maybe even bring back my work on SLO. Who knows? There's violent history everywhere. A lot of folks ask me what I'll do next, and I want to become a professor, but the job market is pretty saturated. Maybe I'll refocus on this channel. I've been trying to legitimize YouTube in the eyes of the history profession. You know, I'm trying to set up like conference panels on it, and I weave this channel into my regular scholarship as well. Maybe making history on YouTube, or whatever, can become a symbiotic part of historians' work. We just have to get it past the acceptance barrier. But as it stands right now, this channel is the equivalent of a side project. I'm not stopping this crazy YouTube thing, even if it doesn't count toward tenure or whatever, but I'm damn sure gonna try. So hopefully this whole thing has given you some insight into me. I think I'm going to continue using the pseudonym Cypher on this channel, but you can call me Joe if you meet me in real life. Remember, I've already got episodes on why I call myself Cypher and why I call myself Cynical, so no need to explain here. Anyways, 100,000 subscribers. Like, I know I'm recording this beforehand, but I can't wait. Thanks for subscribing, and I'll see you guys next time.
And here's to all 100,000 of you. Thank you so much for making this happen.